Freeland, Clinton, Langley, Coopville, whatever, and just type that in the Q&A first, so we know you have a comment, and then start typing your comment, because then we know to wait for you, and we can keep discussing one topic at a time. Okay, with that out of the way, we are going to move directly on to the presentation. I'm going to turn it over first to Dr. Moshe.
Thank you so much. So this is our second time through our bond presentation, and I want to thank certainly Dan for leading this effort, and JJ and Rebecca is here from Integris. So they've been working on putting all of this together. We have Kimmy who's here. She's been on the committee, and several others. So I want to thank all of those folks for getting us to this point. Dan and I are going to go back and forth on this presentation, but he is taking the largest lead because he has really been integral to what's happening. So Dan.
Thank you. So as Stephen mentioned, our last bond in the 1992 has been a long time since we've done any major retrofit of our building. So we're really looking at updating those facilities for the next 30 years. So what is a bond? As we talk about, pursuing the issuance of a bond, what is that really? And a bond is for the physical building improvements. Okay. It provides immediate funds. It's a lot like a mortgage where you get the money up front, you do the work, you pay it back over a period of years, in our case, about 20 years. But it's a special tax assessment, and it is a specific dollar amount we ask for. And then it's used to pay back that loan, which is your principal and interest. Bonds require a supermajority, so it's 60% plus one, unlike a levy, which is only 50% plus one. And there's a validation requirement. You have a certain number of people from the last general election has to actually vote. And it's really used to maintain schools and provide a learning environment by renovating aging buildings. And we talk about our buildings, we will look at those timelines, they are aging, and then replacing infrastructure. One thing I do want to note is that all the money from the bond does actually stay in the district. It doesn't go to the state, it doesn't go someplace else. It goes to, the project we have here and the people we pay to do the work. Timelines. We started this presentations with staff in December, and we have several meetings in January and February where the community and the board has an opportunity to look at what we're talking about, ask questions. And then on February 22nd, the board will vote on whether they have a resolution for a bond or not, which has to be to the county by February 24th for an April 12th election date. So it's a very compressed timeline we're working on right at the moment. Planning process. We created a facility committee who actually started in 2019 looking at our facilities, stopped for COVID for a little while, and then picked back up a little over a year ago. Reviewed facilities, looked at our enrollment to see what that trend looked like, talked about our program needs. And then we brought Rebecca and Integris on board. They have all the expertise and have brought people in to give us prices and look at the needs of our buildings and that and work on cost analysis. And now we're at the recommendation point where we are coming to the board with a recommendation, sharing our information that we found out with the community and getting feedback. And as this is a workshop, if anybody has questions as we go along, feel free to stop and we'll have that discussion as opposed to, waiting or whatever you need to do. We look at the age and condition of our facilities. And if we look at the top green line, that is the high school, middle school, originally built in the early 1980s, remodeled and expanded in the mid 1990s, and is basically at the end of what is considered a useful life for a public building. The blue line is the elementary school, which originally opened in the late 1980s and hasn't had any major work done on it. It was not part of the bond in the 1990s that did major work. So again, also at that timeline. So we look at the elementary school. By the time the bond passes and we actually start work, this building will be almost 40 years old. The original high school is over 40 years old at this time, and the last major remodel of that high school was in the mid 1990s.
So the bond committee, along with district folks, put together what we're really trying to accomplish as we move forward with our guiding principles here. So number one, we want to create a 21st century learning environment. We want to make sure that our students are in, okay, okay, good. You did that. Okay. We want to make sure that our students are really in the most modern environment that we can put them in. And the next slide is the welcoming and identity. And that really speaks to what folks were just talking about, making sure that we have a middle school, high school separation, making sure that we have good signage, and making our schools a place where folks are proud to go to school. And when they drive by, they see that a community has invested in its school. But the identity piece is really important to us, and you'll see some photos on that. Talked about the 21st century learning environment. So the classrooms and updating our classrooms, which haven't really been updated other than paint and maintenance. And again, I want to be really clear. We have done maintenance over time. We have had a maintenance bond in this district, and we have certainly kept up. But the infrastructure and the siding and so on, all of that is cost prohibitive for the annual bond or annual levy that we have. So getting our classrooms up to speed in terms of being ready for today's learning, that's another one of our 6 pillars. Wayfinding and safety, that's really all about getting the parking lots up to speed, making sure that they flow smoothly, because that has been a concern with the changing student population and the way they come in and out of school, as well as signage and safety in our buildings. So again, we know, unfortunately, that our world has become unsafe for schools, and we want to get our schools up to the latest safety measures. So that is a piece of this as well. Course operations and maintenance. This is the what JJ I think is referring to when there's a lot, but this is what people don't see, but really impacts each of our buildings in terms of their performance and their environmental impact. So it also helps us reduce maintenance costs. So something again that we are very, very clear on needing to do. Inclusive environments. We also heard comments here tonight about that. We have students with all kinds of needs who also want to access all of our schools and all of our playgrounds. So it's not just about complying with ADA, but making those structures and opportunities available to all students, whether it's restrooms or play areas or outdoor covered play areas or covered educational areas. Dan.
So the next few slides, we'll look at actual photos of our buildings, and then we'll look at conceptual photos. They aren't designs. We don't have blueprints. We haven't gone down that road yet, but it gives you an idea of what our buildings could look like if we were to pass a bond and then did that type of work. So the first one is a front picture of the high school, middle school, and we're proposing updating exterior, and it's really about pride, students, community. The other part of it is about building integrity. We have places where the siding has delaminated from the building and needs some work. So conceptually, we could have a building that looks something like this, much more modern, very bright, very attractive. This is a picture of the courtyard in the same building. Again, it's been almost 40 years since this work has been done. So as we're doing the work on the building, updating that also. If we're putting new siding on that building, we could also do new hardscape and make it a more attractive place that our students would have pride in and would actually enjoy being. We need to do work to our stadium field and track facility. We do have a grass field that is limited in the use. And so we are proposing a turf artificial type field to replace that, and then some work to the actual structure itself to bring it more up to date. Classrooms. This is a picture of one of the classrooms in the back of the high school, middle school building, and just some updates to some of those places that make them more conducive to the learning environment. We talk about welcoming and identity. The picture on the left is the current entrance that we use to get into the building. The picture on the right is a door that goes into what is referred to as the new commons. And so we could create identity for both the high school and the middle school just by doing some simple things such as creating a canopy of some sort and giving them both an entrance that is identifiable from the parking lot and then would provide them a place that they could have, you know, pride of where they are in this building that is shared together. We talk about wayfinding and safety. We have things like the door on the back of the facility there. There's things that we need to do to improve that. We actually have a classroom outside that door. So if we want to be safe, we need to include that into the facility. And then our parking lots haven't had anything done to them for the last 30 years. And part of it is site circulation, especially in this building. There's a lot of parent pickup and it wasn't really designed well for that aspect of it. We have fewer buses than we had 30 years ago. We could borrow some of that space to make a better flow through this facility. So there's a lot of things we could do. And just the idea that our asphalt and our curbs are all degrading over time, they all need some help. Thinking about a covered walkway that connects this building to the gymnasium at the South Campus. One of the concerns in this building is there's not enough space for the PE program. It is a shared space for PE and for the food service program. So it limits the amount of time that kids actually have in an enclosed gymnasium. And there was a consideration of building another building up here, but since we have one that is going to be vacant at the South Campus a short distance away, it makes a lot more sense to utilize that building and then somehow create a covered connection between the two, which would also work well for transportation when kids are waiting for buses and those type things. We've talked about inclusive environments. The picture on the left is the current playground we have in the back. And the two on the right are newer ideas of what a playground could look like that would allow all children to have that opportunity to play. It's not necessarily available in the environment we currently have. We're also looking at upgrading all of our restrooms, locker rooms, making them ADA compliant if they are not, creating some single-use restrooms, and just an updating of restrooms that are 30 years old and see a lot of usage throughout the day. We're also looking at a coupled covered outdoor play areas, one in this facility and one at the high school, middle school, that would allow our students during the day to have someplace outside where they could have activities outside of the weather, but it also provide opportunity for community. We have a covered area at the South Campus that is used by adults for pickleball. And this would provide more spaces like that. It also provides spaces for our athletic teams. If it was a rain out and they couldn't participate on the field, they could still do some practices and things like that. So it's a very broad multi-use type environments. One of the things we looked at as we're going through this is we're going to talk about updating HVAC and those type of things, is that there's a House bill that is going to make us look at our energy performance and meet a criteria or spend money towards meeting that criteria. And it seemed appropriate that as we work on a bond and we're talking about upgrading the infrastructure, this would be a good time to see what we need to do to meet those standards. So that was part of the conversation when we look at our operational improvements, is what do we need to do to get to this point? Because it is a requirement that we will have to try to meet at some point. And it's based on the size of the buildings, and it comes through in a multi-year process. So operations and maintenance, big part of what we're looking at is improving our mechanical systems. We're looking at, a lot of our buildings don't have the capacity to cool air. So they're just the old heaters on the wall, so we could replace those with a heat pump that would provide both heating and cooling, provide better air quality, just all those type of capacities that right now we don't have based on, 30-year-old systems. Also looking at updating the roof at the high school. It's about 150,000 plus square feet. And when Joe had talked about that, there's things we can do at the levee and things we can't. This is one of the things we can't do with the levee. The size of it, the cost of it, would not be able to do in a levee unless we saved all those funds for a period of about 10 years, which means we wouldn't be doing anything else. So it's not a practical solution. And, it's held up well. There's sections of this that are 30 years old and it's come to the end of its useful life and needs to be replaced. But it is a very large roof that is a very large project. We look at the priorities. If we look at the priorities for this building, we're talking about building improvements on the exterior of the building. So there's some siding that needs to be replaced and some things like that. An inclusive playground, making sure that our restrooms are all ADA compliant and updated. Our heating and cooling system upgrades. A lot of the heating and cooling systems in here are at the end of their life cycle. Also reconfiguration and repavement of the parking lot out here to create that site flow. A covered outdoor educational structure, maybe a covered walkway connecting the buildings, upgrading the controls, which would help a lot towards getting to that energy efficiency compliance piece of it, and then looking at interior flooring upgrades. And when we're looking at these, we're kind of looking at big buckets of activity. So it's not very specific that in 101, we're going to do this. That would be determined after the bond was passed. This is the bigger picture of things that we need to do. At the secondary campus, it's quite similar, but there's a few more things. We need to look at the siding and window replacement in there. Also the structures to identify the entries for the middle school and the high school, some way of giving each of those entrances their own identity. Another covered outdoor educational structure with some storage at that building, an inclusive playground, ADA compliant restrooms, locker room upgrades, replacement of the roof, heating and cooling system upgrades, repaving and reconfiguring that parking lot also, work to the stadium, track and the field upgrades, some classroom reconfigurations to make them useful for what we're doing today as opposed to what we did 30 years ago. Looking at some additional student support spaces that would provide opportunities to provide maybe more nursing services or those type things. Interior floor upgrades, the system controls, and then also upgrading that courtyard that kind of see in the picture right there. So we talk about, how much does one of these projects cost? It's broken down into basically two pieces when we talk about this. The first is the construction costs. How much is it going to cost to have a contractor come in and do the work? And then there's the non-construction costs, things like inflation. If we get this passed in 2023, by the time we do design work, we'd be lucky to get started in 2024, maybe not get finished in 2026. Things are going to cost more. So we have to plan for inflation, and there's a percentage in there. And then there's the soft costs, the things that aren't actually in the construction costs, such as bond costs. We run a bond with Island County, we have to pay for that bond. There's design fees. If we need furniture or equipment, that would be extra. Sales tax, permits, management fees, mitigation fees, and all those things that aren't actually part of the building process. And then we have to also make sure there's enough capacity in this that there's unknowns. We might open a wall and find something in there that we have to mitigate, or there might be a problem with the roof. We have to replace part of the roof as opposed to just replacing the roofing. So you have to make sure there's enough in that for capacity for those unanticipated things. So we are proposing an $80 million bond. And the way we came to that is we've identified about $45 million in projects at today's cost. And then with the inflation, knowing that we are not going to do it in 2023, we've escalated those 6% next year and 4% each year to offset any inflation costs. And then when we talked about those soft costs, is all the things that are not part of the construction cost itself. Those are estimated at about 50% of whatever the construction cost is. So that's another almost $27 million. And that's how we get to that $80 million that we would ask for. Quick look at our historical rates. We haven't had a bond since 2010. We paid the 1992 bonds off at that time. We do have a capital projects levy. We had a transportation levy, which bought yellow school buses at one time, and then the EP&O, which is our general operating levy that we have every year to support the learning environment. And you can see that over time that those rates have gone down. We started at $2.76 in 2001. This year it's at 99 cents. And for 2023, the rate drops to 79 cents. Yes.
I think you're going to ask the same question.
Are these numbers adjusted for inflation?
These are the actual numbers in that year. So there will be a change, and we'll talk about assessment and what causes these to change, but these were the actual rates, and the 2023 rate is the actual rate. And the reason it's going down isn't because we're collecting a lot more money, it's because the assessed value went up.
Well, and the other thing I was going to say is, what's this compared to? It's a,
We'll get there.
thank you.
I'll compare you to a lot of things. Yeah. Yeah, I got it. So this is why those rates change over time. They're based on two things. What's the amount of money and what's the assessed value? And you can see that in 2003 to 2009, assessed value grew, took a dip during that real estate area where prices went down, and then has gone back up again. So based on that, $80 million repaid over a 20-year time frame is about 70 cents per $1,000 of assessed value. And when we did that calculation, we thought that the assessed value was going to be $7,160,000. I actually got the information from Island County Today. It's $7,155,000. So very close to the estimate, but a dramatic change from the current $5,852,000,000. So a big difference in there. And that's why you see that drop from 99 cents to 79 cents in our EP&O and our capital projects, same dollar amounts. It's a different assessed value. So on $80 million at 70 cents, if your home is worth $500,000, we would be asking you to pay an additional $29.08 per month to support that. And for those that aren't really good at math, you can look at it this way. So if you have a piece of property worth $100,000, it would cost you $70 a year, or $5.83 a month. If your home was $750,000, it's about $44 a month to get to that same rate. So it gives you an idea of what the cost of the $80 million would be. You'd asked about how does that compare? These are the school districts that are in Island and Snohomish County, and it's their current tax rates from 22, which is last year. But you can see that Snohomish, their bond EP&O capital projects equals about $4.40 per $1,000 of assessed value. And it goes down from there. And we're currently at 99 cents with the capital and an EP&O. One of the things about the EP&O, that is actually limited based on our per pupil amount. And that's one of the reasons why our levy is low and the rate is low. We are collecting $1 million less than we did 4 years ago because we are limited on how much we can actually collect. But it gives you an idea. And Index is the only one that are actually lower than South Woodby, which is a very, very small district halfway up the mountain. If we look at districts that have similar assessed values, we can see the same type of thing. And, these are larger districts, but the value of the property within that district boundary is very similar. Again, Mount Vernon is $4.60. Arlington, $2.49. And again, South Woodby at 99 cents. So what would this cost us if we had this approved? Well, the assessed value at about $7.1 billion, 70 cents per thousand added to our EP&O and our capital projects would bring the amount up to $1.49 per thousand. So again, the difference is going to be basically the one we saw before, depending upon how much your house is worth, but somewhere between $70 and $523 on that chart. Some of the questions that people have asked, I thought I'd try to answer. What happens if assessed value goes up? Is the district going to collect more money? And it's no. We are going to collect $80 million. School districts, unlike other taxing districts that you might be familiar with, do not do a rate per thousand. The rate per thousand is only an estimate for the taxpayer to get an idea of how much it's going to cost. We actually collect the dollar amount. So as the assessed value goes up, the rate goes down. And an example was our EP&O and capital currently at 99 cents drops to 79 cents. We're getting the same amount of money. It's just the assessed value went up, so the rate goes down. Okay, so it's fixed. It isn't going to be because value goes up, district gets more money. Also, what's the difference between a bond and a levy? And, you know, somebody said, I thought we approved a bond last year. Well, we didn't. A bond basically receives the money up front and it's paid back over multiple years, usually about 20. And it operates a lot like your home mortgage. You get the money up front, you buy whatever you're going to do, and then you pay it over a certain amount of time. Where a levy provides funds on a semi-annual basis with collections in the spring and the fall. And we don't borrow the funds. You know, we get those funds and there is no interest, no repayment. It is kind of a pay-as-you-go type process. And that's why some of the large projects we can't do with a levy because we don't collect enough money to do that. Our last bond was repaid in 2010. So taxpayers have not paid any property taxes towards a bond in this district for the past 12 years. We currently do have a capital project technology levy, which is different than the bond, which is approximately $2.25 million a year. And that's used to support our technology and also for our smaller scaled capital upgrades. We can replace a few heating systems in a building at a time, but we can't replace all of them. And the last thing is that by law, bonds and capital project levy funds can only be used for facility construction, renovation, technology, and major capital projects. They cannot be used to pay for instructional personnel. So it's very limited on the scope of what we can use this funds for. The other question was, do we have blueprints or plans of what we're going to do? And the answer is no. The design process would occur after the bond is approved, if the voters approved it. And it'd be a process where we'd have a group of stakeholders, students, staff, families, community partners, and our architects that would provide input into the design of the projects and then have opportunities for feedback, a lot like we're doing tonight with the community, so they can come in and look at that and have information and share their feelings on what we're doing. That's what I have. Then I was going to see if Rebecca wanted to talk a little bit about the stuff that she brought, and unless Joe has something to go with.
Just wanted to add before Rebecca gets started that all of this information is on our website. There is a page on the website that is labeled bond. We also have a handout to grab before you leave and a survey that's going on right now. And there's a link to that survey on the handout. So we are looking for input. We have 190 some responses already on that survey that only went out a day or two ago. And people have given us their input and their questions. We're getting student input as well. But once the board decides on the bond, and assuming that the bond is approved by the community, at that point, we really, as Dan said, start doing the design in depth. So if you don't get your input in now, there's plenty of time, but please respond to the survey. Rebecca? Oh, yes. And don't forget, we will have another bond presentation and another opportunity for the community next week on Wednesday evening over at the high school. So again, if folks are online or they know somebody who's interested who couldn't be here tonight, we'll be doing this again next week, but even more opportunity for input. Now, Rebecca.
All right. Thank you very much. We have the opportunity for folks to just come up and add some additional comments. I know that Dan went through a lot of data and you've been hearing a lot about everybody's hopes and desires for this bond. And so we just want to take this opportunity to hear what else we might need to be aware of as we're looking and strategizing. So we've summarized all the work that's been done by the bond committee with those guiding principles. So if you have some additional comments on that, we've got aerial site plans that have just that bird's eye view. Come up here, there's some markers, put a Post-it, say, hey, don't forget about this item. We want to collect those items. And then we've got a little bit more information about the artificial turf. Some folks had asked some questions through the planning process, and we wanted to kind of elaborate a little bit more on some of the benefits and constraints of that. And then another question that we get asked a lot is, what if we were to do a brand new high school, middle school? And so using our experience in designing schools all over the region, we did some rough calculations about what would be the program elements that would be in that and what that cost would be if we were to take on that project and tackle that. So that's that $242 million. The other question we get asked a lot is, what if we were just to modernize the building where it's at? And as we think about modernizing the building, we know that the students need to be on campus during that process. So in modernizing the existing building to make it feel like it's a new building, we need to make sure we provide temporary housing for those students. And we need to make sure that we're upgrading it to all the current codes, because as we get to a certain point of investment within the building, it triggers updates to earthquake codes, the stormwater on the site. There's new mechanical codes, and the list goes on and on. So that number is less than new construction, but it is still a pretty significant number if we were to tackle all components of that building. And so this $60 to $80 million, depending upon where the soft costs are in that number, is the strategy that addresses not only the desires at the middle and high school, but some work at the elementary school, and brings all of those targeted high priority items into focus. And that's what we want to make sure we've got feedback on as we're looking at those high priority targets. So I'd like, if it's okay, I'd like to invite everybody to come up and just spend a few minutes.
We certainly can do that. Thank you, Rebecca. The question about new construction versus updating our or what we have in the bond proposal. We did want to make sure that people heard that, because it is dramatically different to build a new facility. And it also is counterintuitive because we want to maintain what we have for our students, but we are still a district that has a small enrollment. So it seemed unreasonable to ask the taxpayers to build a new facility rather than update what we have and extend its useful life another 30 years. So that's why. But to Rebecca's invitation, if you want to take a gallery walk and provide your comments on the Post-it notes, that would be terrific. We're also just going to informally do questions and answers. I mean, we'll stay online, obviously, with the community, but this is a workshop, so it's an opportunity for people to ask experts what they need to ask.
Yeah, so we invite folks to come up, or to just raise your hand if you have a question for one of these folks, and we'll get a mic to you. Any comments, any questions, anything going on? I do have a question just to get us started, since no one else is mentioning anything, to get the ball rolling. I'm sure that you've already investigated this, but I know that there is some concern about additional injury possibilities, soft tissue injury possibilities on field turf or turf fields as opposed to natural grass. So I just want to confirm that y'all have looked into that and found the best, safest possible surface for our students.
Sorry, I was passing out Post-its. I'm not sure I fully heard the question.
This is the turf field, the concerns that came up over turf fields and injuries, and the latest research on that.
Yeah, so the artificial turf facility, not only is very, it responds well to all the impact that happens with high use. And one of the challenges that you guys are dealing with currently is that with a grass field is you're limited to when you can utilize that. And your artificial turf has an extended life and it does need some annual or semi-annual maintenance and just making sure that the turf stays out even. But it has proven with many school districts all around the region to be very supportive of the needs, you know.
My concerns were actually about health and safety, because I know with the NFL in particular, there's been a concern about soft tissue injuries on field turf or on artificial turf.
I'm not as aware, sorry. I'm not as aware of the soft tissue injury. That's not my area of expertise. What I've been involved with is conversations around the different types of synthetic rubber and different explorations around that and the variation between that and grass. So.
Excellent. And I'd just like to suggest that and I'm happy to help out with this, something that the bond committee look into as we're confirming that over the next month or so.
Thank you. My name's Rufus Rose, Max Walton Road. I have a whole bunch of questions. You know me. I have a lot of questions about everything. I have no question that there is a need to update facilities. And I hope that an appropriate amount of money is provided to have good, safe facilities that are conducive to learning. Having said that, the kinds of questions that I have, I helped a guy build houses for 6.5 years after I got out of the Navy. So I have some familiarity, but that was a long time ago. As a taxpayer, I want to know what I'm paying for. And this kind of process, you don't really know. You vote to get an amount of money, but you really don't know what you're getting. You just have concepts. The types of materials that will be used and the adequacy of the amount of money won't be known until bids are received by the architect. I assume that's the way you still do it. So the last one I was involved with this kind of thing, John Carty was a project manager. Are any of you familiar with that? Okay, so I've been here for a long time. The bond had been passed, whatever the funding source had been passed, and plans had been made, and subcontracts had been let. And the public was encouraged to come in, and I looked at all this stuff, and I knew John talked to me, pretty brusque guy, very good at what he did. But I said, John, you've missed something here completely. What's that? And it was the road access. This bond probably won't do this kind of thing. This is just an example. The road, Max Walton Road attaching to 525 was a single road. And I said, you've got to expand that up so you have 3 ways to go out of here. And he kind of recoiled and said, yeah, you're right. I don't know where the hell the money came from, whether it was from the bond or whatever the funding source was then, or whether that the county or the state paid for it. But there are going to be surprises, and the public at the earliest possible time should be able to comment on the various costs, the quality of the stuff. Another example that I don't know if there'll be any lumber, structural material involved here, but assuming there is. The guy on the Washington Policy Center is point, Washington State has a green construction thing. Are we still doing that? I have to do green construction. The example he gave, I forget, isn't John something, is that the green lumber, certified lumber in Washington State was certified to a different standard than it was in Idaho. Idaho's standard was sufficient, but it costs a great deal less. So Washington school districts were putting in Idaho lumber because our legislature had mandated something that made the green lumber from Washington State bid prohibitive to the architect. How do you deal with that kind of thing? with your subcontractors?
That is a very specific. That is a very specific question. And as we're putting the documents together, we work closely with those that are going to be managing the project for the school district with our team and our engineers to make sure that we're meeting all the requirements and the specifications and those performance expectations. And we'll be doing cost modeling at 4 stages throughout the process, are kind of key milestones where we validate that our specifications and the project budget align. And so we're making sure that we're meeting the expectations as well as the budget so that we can address all of those concerns and we don't have any surprises on those products.
And to a couple of your other points, there will be continued opportunities for the community to be involved in discussions of what's happening throughout the design process if the bond is approved. And the soft costs there are where that extra money comes from. There's the money, Mr. Pullman, please correct me if I'm speaking out of turn, that money is set aside for things that will come up. Because we know that in every project, I've done construction with my father also, I've done construction with several other contractors on the South End, things come up. And so you set aside money for those things that come up. And that's part of the $80 million number.
I guess I'd be happier if I had confidence that changes can be the public, this process of I want the facilities to be improved. And I want them to be improved as efficiently as possible. And to maintain sharp eyes and tight fists on the money during this process. It sounds like the soft money in the world I live in is a slush fund. And that's not a comfortable term.
No, let me give you a heads up on how we're going to manage the project. We will have a district project manager who will be tight-fisted on the money and make sure that any change order from what we initiate is done at the most cost-effective way possible. So that is part of our assurance, is that we have every intention of doing that, because that not only maintains the taxpayers' money, but it gets us the best project possible for the amount of money that the taxpayers set aside. So we have every intention of doing that. It is not a slush fund, but I will call it a contingency fund, because when you open a wall and find something that you're not supposed to find in there, we have a built-in contingency for that. But again, it won't just be done behind closed doors. It has to come to the board as a change order. I mean, these things have a process that we will follow. But there will be a project manager, much like John
Carty.
Carty. We will have a project manager for this project as well.
Okay, I don't know if John was paid. He may have volunteered.
Oh, no.
But
he
do
was
you
paid.
anticipate the project manager will be paid?
Absolutely. And that's
And
part
is
of
the
the
money
cost.
that he will, or that person will be paid in the soft money?
Yes. That's part of the
So-
cost of doing business.
Is
Yes.
there a bid process for the project manager?
That's a professional service. So the board has the right to select a project manager, much like the architect. It's a professional service and you get the best possible service you can. But is there a required bid process? No.
No. Does the board say to the public, to me, to you guys, we have these people who have applied to be the project manager and we want you to meet them and talk to them?
Unlikely. It's the board's job to pick that person, not the community's
Will that
job.
be done publicly?
Absolutely.
But the public won't have any say in it.
And just like you don't have say in hiring a teacher.
We get say afterwards, though.
But again, that's why you elect your board of directors. That is their role.
Well, my guess, because of the building experience I have, is that the clients, us, all of us here, will have serious questions as the project goes on. And the more answers that are forthcoming early, the better.
And I encourage you, because we actually have the specifics of what we talked about on the survey, and our community is already generating questions so that we can answer them. So that's the way that we're trying to get our community's input now. That's why we've outlined the big picture projects that we are engaging in. We know that we're going to redo the siding. We know we're going to redo the roof. That's going to take a substantial amount of money. We know that we have to redo siding down here. We know that our parking lots need to be addressed. We
Well,
know that our,
Let me interrupt you on the siding, if I may. What kind of siding do we anticipate
we
now?
anticipate going out to bid for the siding that'll be most appropriate. We have to design what we need, but we know that new siding on the high school is 13 million. Okay, it's siding and roof is,
The high school currently has a stucco, so.
no, it's not stucco. It's actually, it's failing. It's got a membrane. It's again,
It's stucco-like.
it looks like
but so
stucco. It's
does
not
the-
like stucco.
Does the board have the option, for example, to change the exterior siding?
Absolutely. The board can say we
Wait,
want
wait, wait,
metal.
Wait, to metal, corrugated metal?
Yes.
Or all wood or concrete or the whole spectrum of everything?
The board has the opportunity to change the siding to whatever it chooses that's within the requirements and the budget that it sets aside for such a project.
Okay,
So
so
can you pick certain kinds of siding that are not safe on a public structure? No. It has to meet the criteria.
I understand that. The kind of question I'm thinking of is when we decide on the siding, will that be in concert with the other expenditures? Because you're going to be modifying this and that. If we get very expensive siding, then maybe we won't be able to change the toilets or whatever we're going to change. So how is that process of coordinating the decisions about how much to spend on this and what does that have, what impact does that have on these other expenditures? When does that happen?
After the bond is approved and we go through the design phase.
And that's public.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
We do have three people on the Zoom call. If you would like to comment or have a question, please put your name and location in the Q&A. Are there any other questions here in the room?
Come on, Steve. You got a list.
Brooke, quick, give me your mic away. There's 4 mics over there.
Yeah, Rufus spoke many of the things that were on my mind too. And I'm a retired general contractor. And back when the previous project was done, I worked closely with John Cardy. He was on the board before me, and also John Napland. And really, those two guys saved us many millions of dollars, I'm convinced. And you know, so John, with his experience, long time working hundreds of millions of dollars of commercial construction, he knew lots of people, lots of ways. So when you do find a construction manager, somebody like him, if you can, you know, with a lot of commercial experience and a lot of connections to this area, because that really did make a difference. And I'd walk through the project every week with him or Napland and, you know, talk about stuff, and things did come up, surprises came up. And I think I'm interested in sort of these big project, just the sort of price tags you're talking about, because it just kind of blows my mind. I'm retired and I'm not building anymore, but you know, it's just hard for me to wrap my brain around some of that. You know, cost per square foot for roofing, for siding, for parking lots. It's all pretty standard. And if these prices are somehow way off from that, it's going to be a red flag for the community. And you know, the soft costs really add up. So I think that has to all be clear. You know, these are all good projects. It's all seems worthwhile, but the cost is something. One thought was like, if $80 million is approved, but it turns out that after all the costs are said and done and it comes in at 70 or 75 million, is that returned to the taxpayers? Is that, I mean,
The answer.
you know, if it doesn't really cost that much.
No, the answer to that would be if there's not projects that need to be done and we don't use 80 million, it comes to 70 million. we wouldn't sell we wouldn't sell the $10 million worth of bonds that were left over. So we will sell them in kind of increments as
Okay.
we need the money.
As you- Okay, that's,
So if we don't sell them, then we're not going to create that expense.
okay.
And then practically speaking for taxpayers, would that just mean that the number of years in which they are paying off this bond would end early?
Most likely, the number of years would maintain the same, but the rate would go down.
Were you also asking a question about how we arrived at the numbers?
Well, not specifically, but I think people would want to know is like, why does the roof cost this much or the
Yeah.
siding? And Rufus, raised good questions about, are there alternatives to, if it's $10 million to put metal siding on there? Well, maybe you should rethink it or, come up with alternative ideas.
So
Yes,
Steve,
Andrew.
as somebody who is in the process of re-roofing my house, I would love for the cost to be less, but one of the unfortunate pieces of the world we're in is construction costs skyrocketed. I've got a 3,500 square foot roof that the bids were 40,000 a roof.
Mhm.
And that's shingles, right? That's not metal.
Yeah.
And Dan, our roof is how big for the high school? 150,000 square
Really?
feet.
That big.
So I hear you when you
Yeah.
say like that sticker shock, but it's also reality right now.
Yeah, well, I think, the numbers, it would help people to see that. As an example, I think the roof on this building went in about 12 years ago, 10, 12 years ago. Yeah, and I was on the board and we had an estimate from an architect who said it's about $750,000 to roof this very building. I'd been working with a roofer out of Oak Harbor and asked him to do a bid and they did it for 180, so like, what, 30%? And then there's a play structure over on the playground behind us, on the South School. It was estimated to cost $150,000 to do seismic retrofit. We got a local contractor to do it for 20,000. So I'm not saying we can, do that for such giant things like this, but, again, we need somebody like a John Cardy, bring him back to oversee this. And I did have a question about your role as the architect and your company and what is your role to control everything that goes on? Is everything going to go through you, via the board for approval? And what are the fees that your company charges for the whole project?
Okay. So to go back to the cost process and arriving at the numbers, we took the list that everyone had developed and we worked with an independent cost estimator to respond to the cost, and they pull from bids from other districts and around the region and to validate those numbers. So that's just to give you some certainty with how we develop those numbers. Our firm is Integris Architecture, and we do full service architecture, structural engineering, interiors, master planning, a variety of services that support school districts. Your community has only hired us for this pre-bond planning process. And so our hope is that we would be moving forward in supporting you in the design of the project and moving forward with that process. But we have not formally been hired for that next phase of the process. Did you want to speak, Dan, to the design fees and how that's all calculated?
No, I was just going to
Oh.
speak to the same thing, that they were hired for this process and then we will go back and continue or not when we actually have a bond.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And then our design fees, the state actually has a process of outlining how our design fees are calculated. And so when you hire your design professionals, you're hiring based on qualifications, and those design phases are, and those design fees are pretty well outlined by the OSPI, the Office of Superintendent of Public Construction. So.
And we went through a request for qualifications type process to find the architect and all those things. Yeah.
I have a question. I'm just curious if you could share a little bit more about the timeline if the bond were approved in terms of when we actually begin constructing these facilities improvements and possibly speak to the experience of the students who are in the building during that process?
Oh, I don't have a clear timeline. I know that if it's approved in April, then we start the design process. And you probably, Rebecca, have a better idea how long that takes, but I'm assuming with all the community input that we want and the feedback that that's going to take through 2023, most likely.
I just hold on to this. Just with the availability of engaging your school community, we tend to be limited with access in the summer months. And so it'll probably go into the fall. But we'll be continuing to develop test ideas. You'll get more certainty with the look, the feel, the materials, all of those components as we move through the process. And then there's a permitting process that we need to go through as well. And there's just components that it takes a little while to get on the schedule as far as when we engage maybe some traffic consultants and some other folks that they need to work with, normal patterns of the day.
And then once we have that, we go out for the request for proposal, which that process alone is like a 3-month process just to get it together, get it out, get people responding to it, let the bid, all those things. And then normally it may take a contractor another 3 to 6 months before they're available to actually start the work. So my optimistic hope is that, mid 2024, we could probably start some of the projects that we have on here, we could do sooner. If it doesn't require a lot of engineering or design work, if it's just, replacing something, we can do that in a quicker process. But the majority of the large projects are going to take a while.
There's a chance that my class of 2025 kid might see the groundbreaking.
I would certainly hope so.
Thank you. Very helpful.
Steve, put my eyes on that. And I'm not sure, Steve reminded me of something I think is very important, and I'm not sure at what phase it was done when you were on the board and when Cardi was here. But using an example Steve gave, I'm trying to lecture the school district, the board right now. When you sign a contract, make sure you have the authority to compare what the architect or the subcontractors say, and you don't have to accept it. You can go, as Steve suggested, to some other local person. I don't know how you write that into a contract. Did I say that accurately, Steve? Am I clear? Do you understand what I'm saying? The architect, I'm going to make you sound terrible. I don't mean to do that. The architect comes from Seattle and they do high-rise structures all the time, and they have people that they live on money, our money. And we don't want that. We want to get the best bang for the buck. So how do you write? Maybe I should ask the architect, do you have contracts where school districts say, well, when it comes to siding, you can tell us what you want, but we can go look at it. Or when it comes to playground equipment, you tell us what you want to spend and we think we can get it. But now you don't want to do, I wouldn't want to do that if I was an architect. You're in there to get the job. You want to make your profit, and that's appropriate.
Yeah, and I think it's important to, and I didn't go into a lot of detail. Our firm just works with school districts and we just do public facilities. And so we understand that we're being trusted with the taxpayers' dollars, and our job is to be really good stewards of those dollars and partner with you in identifying what is the value, what are your expectations, and how those dollars are spent. And there are a variety of strategies when it comes to getting the work done. We can outline performance expectations. We can of where materials are sourced. We can identify alternates. So if you say, hey, we really want this playground equipment, but we'd be okay with this one too and that one as well. And we could get multiple prices, and we can factor in to make sure that we're getting the best value. And so there are a variety of strategies that we can implement as we're going through to make sure that we're meeting those goals you're hitting.
Would that
identifying.
include, if I understand Mr. Scholl's comment, that you say, okay, the playground equipment, we've had several bids and this is what it comes out to be. And I'll say $40,000. And Steve comes along and says, I got this buddy up in Oak Harbor. He'll do it for 10.
We have to follow the rules of the state on the bidding process.
No,
Yeah.
they're all the bid is qualified. It's just a lot less than you could come up with.
So
Yeah,
Rufus,
and-
it's the responsibility is of the district to do the RFP, the requests, and to accept those. The architect isn't going to tell us that we're going to use this company.
Yes.
Okay, we're, as a district, we will go out and we will request proposals and get them from whoever sends them to us. And then we analyze those and say, okay, who do we want? Based on the criteria of what we're requesting, are they meeting that criteria? What's their cost? And we have that determination. So it isn't going to
It
be
isn't
the
my
architect.
decision.
They're just helping us with the design part and, you know, the expertise of here's what you need to do to meet the requirements of the building conditions in the state of Washington. It's our responsibility to do the request for proposal, to make sure that they are meeting, you know, all the requirements for public bids. And there's a lot of those. It's very laid out by the state of Washington. You know, we have to do public prevailing wage and all this stuff. We can't just have Johnny homeowner come in and build something for us. There's very specific how we do
I
things.
understand that, but what I heard.
But it's our
Steve-
responsibility and the board has to accept it. So it isn't going to be somebody from outside telling us what we're doing. They're helping us with, what do you need? What are the alternatives? What do you put in that proposal that somebody is going to respond to?
Steve, is that the way it worked when you were on the board? When you found somebody that did it cheaper?
The answer, I can answer that for you, Steve, because I did the building roofing here. I was here. Yes, we went out for proposal and, you know, I think it was Savage Roofing or whoever it was that came in and said, yeah, we can do it. And here's the price we'll do it. We got 4 different bids and they had the lowest price and met the criteria of what we were requesting based on the quality of the shingles and all the things that we put in that request. So that really becomes our responsibility to pick who we're going to have do the work, what that is. It just, they're going to help us set that criteria of here's what it has to meet as far as a standard.
I want to pick on the architect again. But it's a friendly picking and it's in the benefit for the school board and for the people who live here. One of the jobs I was involved with when I was building houses with another guy who knew more about it than I did. We had a family wanted to remodel on a house. And the wife insisted that an architect be involved with the remodeling of the project. And the husband said, I want my wife to be happy. That's a smart thing to do. But I don't want the architect to be involved with all of the project. Because the architect in that instance, and there's a question in this, is paid 10% of the gross. And I don't want to pay extra money for things. I'm going to satisfy my wife with an architect, but I can do these other things with the contractor I was working with. So is your fee a percentage of the gross? Is it a negotiated thing with the school board? Or is it what I did real estate too? And when I did real estate, the general public was told the commission is 10% or 6%, depending on what it was, but it was totally negotiable. And a prudent purchaser of a home or land would say to me as a real estate licensed agent, is that a fixed percentage? And I had to say and wanted to say, no, it's not. It's negotiable up and down. Is your fee a percentage? Is it negotiable up and down?
So our fee is established per the protocols with the Washington laws. And so it depends on the scope that we're doing. So when we're doing the scope that's identified, then our fee would follow the protocol that's been outlined.
Has that been established by the legislature?
Yeah.
They say that if you spend $7 million, you get X percent. And if
Yep.
it's $50 million, you get
A different percentage.
X minus, I assume a lower percentage.
And there's a different percentage based on whether it's new construction or modernization. they've got it all spelled out.
So the school directors here have no say in that. They
It's
simply obey the law.
it's all spelled
Rose?
out for the protocol. So
Can I just give you a little example from my personal experience around how a project like this can go? On a very
But
small
before you
scale?
do, the things I'm saying, I know they sound tough. And it's just to make it easier for this thing to work.
Oh, yeah.
I'm
No,
I'm asking these
I
questions.
just think I can give you an example around how I
Okay.
view a project like this on a much smaller scale. But so I was involved as an executive director with a nonprofit that fundraised for and broke ground for a significant capital project
Up
during.
there in the woods where you.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so this all started right before the pandemic. And then the pandemic happened. And so costs went through the roof, contractor availability changed, materials changed, shipping got gummed up all over the globe. Everything changed, but we had a really savvy project manager. We had a team keeping a really close eye on the numbers, and we were value engineering the heck out of it at every stage and looking at where can we cut costs? Where can we avoid cost overruns? How can we stay within our defined contingencies? And how can we still get a really high quality structure that our donors, who are like our public, our paying customers in that case, can still feel really proud of and honors the vision of this project. And I think we succeeded. We ended up with something beautiful, but it took a lot of people being really mindful and scrutinizing the numbers and making tough decisions throughout. So I expect that we're going to have a team that's
So I'm pleased to hear you say that. So you've got experience. Now, let me ask the other school directors. Do any of you have experience in large construction projects of this size?
Nothing this size. My father and I contracted and built our own house. So we do have some experience with contracting fees, but nothing this size.
Joe?
We just built a barn. Does that count? No, I've never done anything like this before, sir. But I've spent money and I've not spent money, and I know how to be prudent with money regardless of how it's being spent.
I've heard you, and I don't need to ask the other people. Yes, be tough, be tough.
Well, hold on there
yeah.
now, Rufus, because I do have experience with this. Thank you. I actually did an RFP for a roof bid just last year on one of our school buildings. So, so yeah, like it is a transparent process. Absolutely, we are not. I trust the integrity of this board, and I trust the integrity of the people that we have designing this. JJ knows those buildings inside and out. And I would hope that the public would recognize that we would be good stewards
Yeah.
with the money.
But the last comment, and this is for the student representatives. You won't be here when this is all done. When the buildings are finished. But please pay really close attention, because it's one hell of a great experience to see all of the bickering and the fighting and the agreements that go on. It's tough. Those of us who have built a house for when we're married, it's one of the meanest conversations you're ever going to have with, in my case, with my wife. It's not pleasant. It's fighting. It's where's the money and why am we spending this? And if you kids can get in there, if they'll let you get into this business and give you some responsibilities and authority, you'll learn an awful lot that will stand you in good stead the rest of your life. I don't know where I got this microphone.
I'd like to
I
actually
think
give
Audrey's-
Anne a
yeah,
chance to
thank you.
respond to your first question too.
Yeah, I'm gonna, mirror what Rufus said around, I'm speaking specifically to our student reps here. I'll mirror what Rufus said, that it is an arduous process. My family just built a house. We hired an architect, we hired a contractor, we hired subcontractors. We utilized those people as the experts in their fields and the professionals in the work they were doing. But at the end of the day, it's us that have to live in the house. And so it is a tough process. It's hard. I will also say it is terribly rewarding. A lot of things get learned along the way. A lot of work gets done in teams. I think both Rufus and Steve spoke to the concept of how many people and how much energy and time and effort it takes. So anytime we can have student input on all of the process is so powerful. So if you have peers who would like to come offer their their thoughts, their information, whether they're going to be in the school district or not, when we break ground. And when results happen, have them come to the next meetings, have them give their input. Students can take the survey, yes?
Yes, and many students have.
Perfect.
And there will be more, again, more opportunity as we go forward, assuming that the public supports the bond, that there'll be very direct involvement with students in terms of specific design needs for classrooms and buildings and sites and so on. And I just wanted to chime in. I know Dan has a lot of experience managing the money and managing it fiercely, and I really appreciate his leadership. In my past experience, I went through major district construction and major bond work and worked directly with the construction manager and saw kids being displaced and then replaced and offices moved and so on. And again, I went through it 3 different times. So there is enough experience here to know how to manage this effectively and to call in the expertise that we need. And in this state, as Rebecca has said, it's very, there's a lot of state oversight on the architect and engineering pieces of this. So I feel pretty confident that we have put together a good picture. I too had sticker shock. I went to the first time I went to the bond meeting, I basically said, I don't want to see anything more than 50 million. And they all just sort of humored me and laughed at me and were like, yeah, we're not going to get anything for that because it's shocking, the price of doing business. I'm hopeful that, to your question, Steve, that maybe we actually, I shouldn't say it, but maybe it'll be less than we think because prices will start to drop, but there's no guarantee. And we really need to get that was before I got into the meeting, they were coming up to 100 million and it got reduced to 80. But I walked into my first meeting, which was not the first meeting they had, and said, I don't want to see anything more than 50. What can we do for 50 million? And it wasn't nearly what we need to do. So at any rate, my point is that we are doing the best service we can for our district, and we appreciate all of the input to make sure that we get the best we can for the funding that we can afford. And I think we're in a good place. I really believe that what we have here in front of the community is really good work to be done. And hopefully we can get all those projects in. That's my hope. So I'm confident as we go forward. And I think that folks should fill out the survey and give us their direct input.
And the link to the survey is on the screen right now. If you're listening to this later on YouTube, take a look at your screen right now and you'll see the Google form link there on your screen.
And it's also on our website and very available for folks to fill out. And quite frankly, people's questions have informed our FAQs, our frequently asked questions that are also on the website. And we have several of them. And I think that's wonderful when people ask their questions and we can get them answered. So thank you very much. And we will meet again next week at 6:30 over at the middle school, high school building. And that will also be an open community forum. So again, if folks couldn't come tonight, encourage them to come next week.
Thank you, Dr. Moshe, Mr. Pullman, and everyone who, oh, sorry. Yes, please.
Real quick, as a student who's being part of this process, but is not going to be here when the build is done or even happening really, it's really great to see how this is all coming together and give input, especially for future students. I have siblings graduating in 2026 and 2031. So at least one of them, if they're here, will see the end of this and the new building. And I think it's really cool to think of those students who will be able to go through high school and middle school in a building that they can be proud of. And I think that's something that's really great to see and be part of this discussion.
And something I would like to have speaking on behalf of students who are in the district right now, students know more than anyone the absolute need for the maintenance and repairs, especially for future students. And in order to have pride in our district, it is so important to be in a space where you feel comfortable, not just necessarily, mentally, but honestly, physically, and just having that space that feels comfortable to learn in. And just safe. So please, taxpayers and community members and students and parents, please fill out the survey.
Thank you both for putting that in. Oh, we've got one more. Let's get you a mic.
I assume this construction will be done during school hours. Is that correct?
Yeah.
School hours, summer, after school, it depends on what we outline for that process.
So do you have anything allocated for the management of those students?
Yes,
That's in the bond?
that's in that soft cost. It was on the
Soft cost.
list of any kind of, if we have to do a short-term relocation or anything that's all in the soft cost and was listed there as one of them.
And I was a student at South Woodbury High School when the last renovations were going on there, as was Marnie. And it was annoying to hear the construction sounds, but it was also really cool to see it take shape as it was happening.
And I'll just add that as a parent returning to the district with my own children, it's fun to see them in the things that were new and shiny that I didn't quite get to fully experience as a graduating senior.
Hopefully, quick question for Dan. There was a slide that showed a House bill and a Senate bill mandating energy efficiency improvements. Are those still bills or are those laws?
They are laws.
And so if the bond doesn't get approved by the board, or if it does get approved by the board, but not by the voters, what would be the district's plan for conforming to those laws?
That's really difficult. It's one of those things that's kind of an unfunded mandate. It's like you will work towards this. The way I understand it is that you have to work towards the performance. You may not get there, but you have to either, and I could be wrong, and JJ, correct me if I'm wrong, you either have to put financial resources towards improving it, or there's some type of a fine.
$1 per square foot, you said? Yeah.
So if you look at the high school at 150,000 square feet, that's a pretty large fine. If you're not making an effort towards that, we, like I said, the levy can do a little, but it will not bring us to speed over by the time that the law sets in, which is, I think, 2026 for that building, 2027.
So we could do some incremental improvements to get towards that.
Right,
but-
as long as you're making
yeah.
an effort, you won't
Yeah.
be fined, but right, correct.
And I think we want to be in compliance with that as soon as possible because it's for the betterment of the students and the staff who are in those buildings. So clearly the bond is better, but we do have the capability to make the necessary incremental improvements, which is what it sounded like, Joe, you were worried about.
We can work towards it, but we won't meet the mandated
Right.
requirements.
Right. Okay. Yes, thank you all for the input, for the discussion. We're going to move on to policies.